So I think we did, in the first panel, we really discussed that the administration has mischaracterized the nature of the threat from, they narrowly see as a narrow terrorist threat to a larger global Islamist insurgency, which they've mischaracterized the character and the extent of the threat. In the second panel, we really talked about how we really haven't come to grips with the nature of the ideological component of the struggle. And in the last two panels, we've really focused beyond kind of the kinetic defeat of the enemy and the winning the war of ideas to actually creating the constructive alternative and the key issues of civil society, one of which is certainly the issue of religious freedom, but the other is broadly under the heading of economic freedom. It's difficult to conceptualize. We tend to focus on political freedoms and public safety. It's difficult to conceptualize how you can achieve either one of those without both the belief of tolerance in a society, but also the capacity to create a healthy civil society, and that fundamentally gets to the issues of economic freedom. So Anthony Kim, who is the editor of our Index of Economic Freedom here at the Heritage Foundation, and George Dvorak, sorry, the International Republican Institute. I think a great wrap-up here. So what I'm going to ask Anthony to do is maybe kind of give a larger overview of the nature of economic freedom and how it's relevant to the discussion of defeating the global Islamist insurgency. And then maybe we can dive into some kind of specific case studies. I know you've done work in Syria and Tunisia both. I think it'd be very interesting to kind of go into that. And then with any time we have remaining, we can do some questions if folks are interested, and then we'll wrap up. So, Anthony, over to you.
Thank you, sir. So my talk will be very short. It'll be about 10 minutes to 15. I'm just going to set some parameters that we're going to pay attention to. Before we do that, I want to thank you again for joining us this afternoon. But I think some of you here, maybe one or two, you guys been staying here from the morning session. So really, really appreciate your participation today. And I'm pleasantly surprised and honored to share the floor with my good friend George. He and I, we spent some time last year in Tunisia. We got a few things done, and he's going to expand his presence to different countries in the region, including Syria and Lebanon. So good to see you, my friend. And also, I want to echo briefly Professor Farr's earlier comments on the importance of religious freedom, why we need to empower that part of the activity and also promote that. Because here at the Heritage Foundation, we deeply care about economic freedom. But if you look into economic freedom, it's not really foreign to religious freedom either. They go together. They go hand in hand. So when we talk about promoting economic freedom and religious freedom, I think we have to look into those things in the same context. So this last session, the title of this is Fighting with Economic Freedom. But I think in essence, we're really talking about fighting for freedom. So for that matter, there's no quick or easy end to this kind of engagement. The progress we'll make will come through the persistent accumulation of successes, some seen or some unseen. So this is a very complex matter we are going through. And obviously, in this short session, we won't be able to offer any silver bullet, one-size-fits-all solution to the challenges we are confronting. But what I'm going to do through my short presentation is that to go over 3 key parameters I think we should keep in mind and pay greater attention to. And perhaps during the Q&A, we can further elaborate those 3 points. And my first point is that, just taking one step back, we need to be reminded of the nature of our adversaries and the fundamental aspects of our engagement in this ongoing battle. And as we heard in an earlier session, the continuously evolving enemies we are confronting today, they have no fixed address, but they have global access to information, communication technology, and finance. And plus, they're undoubtedly ambitious and barbaric. They're very brutal. And these extremists have equipped in turning their pursuit of violence into a new form of transnational corporate enterprise equipped with destructive capabilities. So our challenge today is much bigger than before, and we really need to make focused and sustained engagement. And doing so, I think we need to recognize the 4 aspects of our engagement. 1, winning this struggle, it takes time. It's not going to be an overnight process. History makes a strong case for patience, and sometimes very painful patience. And I think that's unfortunate nature of the battle we're forced to get engaged in. And second, I think now is the time to get our strategy right and strengthened. We should not prof getting our strategy right. This is time to do so. And our engagement should be multidimensional. So earlier 2 sessions in the morning, we talked about defining those enemies we're confronting. And earlier session before this one, we talked about religious freedom. And now we're talking about economic freedom. So this is very complex and multidimensional battle we are engaged in. And public battle of ideas and communicating the importance of freedom, I think that's very vital in terms of moving it forward. And also last point is that military power alone won't defeat the violent extremist. As we all know, promoting economic freedom is key pillar of our strategy. And we really need to focus on effectively delivering the free market cure in this battle. And if we miss this best chance, then we are basically failed to move forward. So if we really want to engage and make things happen, I think we really need to be specific about what we can do. So for example, in the Middle East and North Africa, the big problem is this lack of economic freedom and therefore opportunity, and huge informal market. The informal economy in the Middle East and Africa includes vast number of potential recruits of those extremists. And where they go, so goes the region. So these people, often young and underemployed, are marginal people in the region's ongoing struggle. They are central actors in this long battle, and we need to recruit them to our camp, not to the other side. And if you think about this, I mean, those radical leaders we talked about earlier, those terrorist groups, they're cold-blooded and tactical planners with ambitions to seize control of distortion and manipulation. By contrast, most of their sympathizers and would-be recruits, they're ordinary people. They just want to work and they want to do things for their family. But because of the lack of opportunities, they don't do that kind of stuff. So these facts reach my second point. We need really targeted security investment and real engagement with the countries in the region. I think on this point, we have a very concrete example that we really have to pay greater attention to. And I want to say we cannot and should not let Tunisia's ongoing transition derail. I mean, if you think about Tunisia, this is the birthplace of the Arab Spring. We talked about earlier, all the complex, religious sort of problems, but because of the Arab Spring and since then, the equation we are facing got much more complicated. It's a religious freedom issue as well as economic freedom issue. Tunisians have come a long way, defying the critics and cynics again and again. The bottom-up transition the country has been making continues a space in the birthplace of the Arab Spring, and the country really deserved strong United States support. I want to highlight again, because last year when Tunisia had this presidential election, the runoff presidential election, we had an honor to host the then Tunisian ambassador to the United States. Now he's serving as Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, basically #2 position in Tunisia's foreign affairs. He really understood and underscored the importance of U.S. engagement. And he said, we Tunisians are aware that we have to rely on our own potential, vision, and determination to devise and implement the right policies in order to achieve tangible outcomes. Tunisia is committed to a durable partnership with the U.S. Beyond urgencies, we need to elaborate together a new vision for a long-term strategic partnership and shape a new partnership between the two countries that is value-driven, program-based, and result-oriented. I think that should be the core part of our engagement with the region. Value-driven, program-based, and result-oriented. And next month, in June, Tunisia's new president is coming to town to meet President Obama. And I really hope that that's another occasion, unique occasion, that United States can recommit itself to true economic development and also a long-term engagement with this important country, Tunisia. I mean, as we know, President Obama has been talking about the importance of this kind of engagement, and he even highlighted a moment of opportunity in the region should not be lost. But what we've been seeing since his speech, that speech was given in May 2011, but event after event, he's been not following through his words. So this fact leads to my final point of this short presentation. I think we really have to recognize that if we want to promote economic freedom abroad, we must practice at home first. And our economic freedom and its leadership in international security are really interconnected. It's not something separated. And it's not an exaggeration that our weak economy has weakened support for our robust U.S. foreign policy. So it's one thing that we try to promote economic freedom through different means, but if we don't exercise good policies that advance economic freedom at home, we will not be successful in this long-term battle. And for that matter, I just want to highlight that, over the past 7 years, since 2009, basically, we've been losing our economic freedom every year. And even though in our 2015 Index of Economic Freedom, we recorded a slight uptick in terms of our economic freedom, the trend line is very, very clear. We've been losing our economic freedom. And that means we are losing our capacity in terms of promoting economic freedom abroad, because our friends and allies, they are looking to us, and we are not doing our homework, basically. And it's one thing that we talk about the importance of economic freedom, but if we don't really exercise it at home, I don't think we're making any case better or stronger. So enhancing economic freedom and sustaining vibrant economy at home is fundamental to garnering support for exercising our leadership abroad and therefore advancing economic freedom in the Middle East and North Africa. And I think this is time to do so. And like I said earlier, if we keep thinking, next time, next month, I don't think we'll have an opportunity. And by then, we'll lose our opportunities and precious time and energy in terms of pushing forward our economic freedom. So restoring economic freedom at home must be a key pillar of our strategy moving forward. So I just want to reemphasize that promoting economic freedom should be a key part of our strategy, but it's a very complex process. And in terms of specific action items, I think this is time to think through and really apply those action items to our friends and allies in the region, beginning with Tunisia.
Thanks. I really appreciate about that is the president was kind of roundly criticizing some of the administration officials when they, in the run-up to and during the Countering Violent Extremism conference, when they said, well, this is about jobs. We need to get people jobs. And, in a sense, he was right. But it was just this kind of overly simplistic comments that economic freedom is not about kind of a giant New Deal project. It's about creating vibrant, successful economies that empower people, which, as you said, is a much more complex activity. And so not only is it just not as simplistic as a kind of a dumb bumper sticker of, well, if they just had jobs, there wouldn't be terrorists, which isn't true because we have lots of poor societies, actually, which don't produce any terrorists at all. And we have wealthy societies which actually do produce terrorists. But not only is it is something that's bigger than just a notion of, well, if a person's got a job, they're not going to be a terrorist. It is something the administration hasn't engaged in at all. They really haven't had an economic freedom agenda. And even that comment about, well, if people just have jobs, that was lip service, because if you actually look at what the administration has done in these kind of key regions where you're dealing with a global Islamist insurgency, whether it's in the Middle East or North Africa or in South Asia, our record's actually not very good. So I'm very excited to kind of hear about Tunisia, to look at some of the things about what are the kinds of things that you could be doing and should be doing, which would make a difference. So I think, George, having you here is just, and having that dimension to this is really exciting. So I turn it to you.
Thank you. Well, I actually want to start this story about Syria, and then I'll go back to Tunisia. Last night I was using my remaining economic freedoms in this country. I lived in Tunisia for 4 years, and I recently moved back. So I really enjoy living here, and I went to Whole Foods last night. I was waiting, buying all this great food, and, there was a long line in the Whole Foods. So I was standing in this long line, waiting to, pay for my food. And I was playing with my favorite toy, the Twitter. And as I was standing in this line and flipping through tweets, a picture came up. And it was a picture of 4 school children from Syria covered in blood, who survived the barrel bombing attack by Assad's forces. And I was shocked. I was, you know, I've seen wars and other stuff in my life, and I was standing there just frozen in this line in the Whole Foods until somebody said, "Sir, would you please move?" Because I was kind of, you know, flipped. And then I realized, you know, I'm standing there are all these great people buying all this great food, everything is great here. How many people will know about this in America, and how many people will care about this in America? We stop to care here about what's going on in the societies around the world where the children get killed every day. And I kind of wondered, is there so much violence in the Middle East that people here actually got immune to it, that nobody really cares about all this ugly stuff that's going on there? I recently switched to Syria program from Tunisia program. I lived in Tunisia for 4 years from the very beginning. I landed there after the revolution. I left there after the last elections. I ran a high-rise program there for 4 years, and then I started working with Syria. And I make frequent trips to the south of Turkey and to Lebanon, which is also the portfolio that I cover. And one thing that you notice is a very serious lack of idea and a very serious lack of policy here about what we are doing there. I've been working in the Middle East for years. Before Tunisia, I also spent a couple of years in Iraq. And I've been thinking and talking to people. We work with political actors, we work with government officials, we work with civil society. And we were thinking about what were all the causes for all the problems that we see coming out of the Middle East. In my mind, the big problem is the cultural heritage of dictatorship that existed in the Middle East for decades, that were somewhat accepted by the United States as allies because they were seen as stopping the worst evil as coming out of it. Most of these dictatorships, and I will just name some of the people who create this connection: Assad, Saddam Hussein, Hosni Mubarak, Gaddafi, Ben Ali. I must be missing some other names, but there are a few others. All of these regimes were based on a strong etatist state. It was all state. You were working for the state, you were serving the state was your big brother. There were very few people who were allowed to go beyond the state, and those belonged to the small elites of these societies. Everybody is talking about countering violent extremism, about getting jobs to some poor people, but you know what? The problem in these societies for decades has been that you have a very well-educated, very distant elite that usually makes 2 to 3% of the society, and then you have the rest of the society that is supposed to serve the elite. When we talk about economy, this is also very, very clear. In Tunisia, for instance, since the country's independence in 1956, most of the land was nationalized and owned by the state. The land that was owned by the French before was just taken by the state. And then, during Bourguiba's rule, he was giving this land to his cronies as the payment for loyalties. Following that, Ben Ali was doing the same thing. You actually do not have a farm, although you have a perfectly beautiful farmland in this country. We did a lot of polls in Tunisia. 78% of young people in this country who are unemployed would usually tell us how they want to be hired by the government, because that was a natural choice. Why would you even think about starting your own business? Because when you want to start your own business, you need to get 45 stamps from 45 corrupt officials who you need to take for lunch, as they like to call corruption there. And the problem is that even in a society that is further, much better off than Syria, than Iraq, than even Egypt, Libya, where you can actually do things, people are not willing to do these things because there is this oppressing history. And there is no freedom of thinking, there is no critical thinking that will actually enable people to start thinking about economic freedom. As Mr. Farr and as Anthony said, one freedom doesn't go without the other freedom. The freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of economy, they all go hand in hand. Tunisia is, again, further away than any other country in the region because Tunisia had free elections, unlike most of the countries in the region. We had parliamentary, presidential, and presidential runoff in November, December, actually October, November, and December of 2014 that were very successful in Tunisia. And this is where people actually, for the first time, realize that they have some rights, that they can actually go out and select who will rule the country. Now, in Tunisia, the next step is going to be simpler than in other places, but still very, very complex. The new government needs to deal with the history of corruption, with thousands of people who work for the government but don't really do much, with changing the legislature, with providing opportunities for investment. They keep talking in Tunisia about foreign investment, but the foreign investor doesn't want to come to the country where he doesn't have any protection of his investment, where you cannot change currency into convertible currency or take money in and out of the country. Why would you invest there? I think that's very, very important thing, and this goes beyond Tunisia, this goes for the whole region, is thinking about the elites. The elites who are distant from the ordinary people in the Middle East. This is the problem of Syria. In Syria, you have people who live in the city and the people who live in the village, and they don't talk to each other. They may be on the same side in the civil war, and they still don't talk to each other. I think that there is a very good example of economic transformation, economic reform that worked in Islamic country, conditionally speaking Islamic, but Turkey did a very good job in reforming its economy from a very centralized state to a very open market, you can open a business in Turkey in a day. If you're a foreign investor, you don't pay tax for 5 years, just hire Turks. And the Turkish economy and the growth of Turkish economy in the last 5 years has been very clearly evident of that. However, Turks made some very hard steps, and they actually still have a very hard and very strong state administration that is functioning in the system. But again, their steps were very positive, and you can see the results in how the economy worked there. I think that the big problem with American involvement in the region is the lack of strategy. I agree with Anthony completely about this. American public opinion has a very short attention span. Everybody wants every war to finish, to be end by Christmas, every year. And so even when America was involved in this region, it was always from one Christmas to another Christmas because we wanted to end the war by Christmas. If there was a strategy for 10, 13 years that America spent in the region, I think there would be a much better result. And not just employing unemployed young people, but actually building a much better strategy. I will end on a note of our enemies, because I also like to study the enemy. And I will read to you what al-Baghdadi said in his address when he proclaimed the caliphate. Actually, this is one place where they have an address. Usually, they don't have, a zip code or whatever. There is a zip code for caliphate. It's in Raqqa, Syria, and in the areas of Iraq and Syria. He said, "O Muslims everywhere, whoever is capable of performing hijrah, immigration, to the Islamic State, then let him do so, because hijrah to the land of Islam is obligatory," Baghdadi said. "We make a special call to the scholars, especially the judges, as well as the people with military, administrative, and service expertise, medical doctors, engineers of all different specifications and fields. These guys are building the society that will hire people, and that is offering to those people who do not have opportunity in elitist, closed regimes of the Middle East something that is new and different. These guys are not stupid." In a video that ISIS released, there was a Canadian who joined ISIS who said, "We need engineers, we need doctors, we need professionals, we need volunteers, we need fundraisers. There is a role for everybody there." We are not countering this. And we are not countering this because we do not have a strategy that is not just talking about let's give some people jobs, but about systemic change in the ways that the countries in the Middle East are arranged and in the freedoms that provide the incentive for the young people of this region to actually stay at home, to do something good for their country, to have a family and raise a family. That for me is the biggest problem, and that is, I think, the core for the future thinking about the strategy in the region. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. So I will, if there are last questions, I will entertain those. So if anybody has, just raise your hand. So Walter has one and one here. So I think we'll wrap up with those two. I did want to say that I appreciate what I liked about those two presentations together is it actually kind of got economic freedom to something that was more concrete than just this kind of generic kind of concept, and also introduced the notion that, you know, it's just not about, you know, giving money to people to hire people for jobs. It's not about just layering foreign aid or foreign direct investment into a country, which, as you pointed out, can often just go into more greatly empowering elites to just further increase their stranglehold of the country. But you really kind of got to some of the key issues there of property rights, corruption, rule of law, the things that actually, if the society changes those, empower people to actually exploit their economic freedom. And so I thought that was very useful. It's a great to-do list. You know, it does set a very high bar for what our administration needs to do beyond kind of very traditional American instruments of economic foreign policy, which routinely largely failed, because it's those are really about process as opposed to true leadership and transformation. So I'm glad we got that on the table as part of the long list today of what we're not getting right. Walter?
Yeah, Walter Lohman with the Heritage Foundation. I wanted to ask specifically about rule of law. In that seems to me to be the biggest challenge because there's a big cultural component to it. And anywhere you look at the Middle East, it's just hard to imagine how you get from here to there because there is no rule of law generally, and there seems to be no cultural affinity for rule of law. In fact, you talk about the elites. Middle East, the more elite you are, the less the rules apply to you. And anyone who is anyone doesn't follow the rules because those rules are for the suckers, right? So, I mean, how do you change that mindset? Because rule of law is essential to any of what you all are talking about.
So maybe George could just talk about how they've tried to deal with that in Tunisia. That'd be good. And then we'll go to our last question over here.
I actually think this is a great question, and this is definitely one of the core problems. What I experienced in Tunisia for 4 years is that, yes, if you know the right person, you can go around any rule. But however, their laws are probably the most complex and the complicated laws that I ever read. This is like old school French. The French have moved on, but it remained in Tunisia. And the complexity of the law was not made, the law was not made in that manner just because they wanted you to go through the complex process. It was actually made so the government can say, well, you need to jump through this hoop, this hoop, this hoop, this hoop, and then 3 times through all of them when you go back to get something done so that they can control you. I think that the big step is changing the legislature in the countries, thinking about a lot simpler and faster justice, but it's a very, very deep reform that needs to happen. Now, what I know for sure is that there are people in Tunisia who understand this. And again, I talk about Tunisia as a case in the region where that is one country that's much further away than the rest of the region. There are people in the government who know this. There are people who understand this. But those people, when they start doing all of these changes and reforms, also need to keep in mind a very strong resistance that will come from the strong state apparatus, a very strong resistance that will come from the trade unions, a very strong resistance that will come from the people who are in the financial and other elites, because you know what, this system really works well for them. Why would they change it? So it's not all going to go well and smooth and easy. But I think, again, that the first important step that exists is that in Tunisia, in the new government, there are some politicians, some young people who understand that this needs to change.
Okay, Anthony?
Yeah, just quickly, I think, you know, without really functioning rule of law, we cannot really do anything in the region. I mean, we just talk about religious freedom, economic freedom, that's all in vain. So in order to sort of make a meaningful impact, I think I've been thinking that, I mean, from our perspective, we talk about democracy promotion and stuff like that, but we got to differentiate democracy from rule of law. I mean, rule of law is far more important factor in terms of advancing economic freedom. Democracy is one thing here and something else in different countries and in the region. So I think we really have to emphasize or change our mindset. What we want to do is rule of law promotion, not democracy promotion. I mean, election, as we know, it doesn't really make any big difference. What we really need is a functioning rule of law in the country.
So we'll go to the last question, but excuse me, that does raise a really good point. And that it gets this distinction between having an election is not democracy, right? Election is just a process. But if it's not true to the democratic principles underneath that of providing people to, in a sense, have sovereignty over their own society, then it's not really democracy, it's just an election. The same way it works as laws. You can have lots of laws. It doesn't mean you have rule of law. As a matter of fact, as we saw in the old Soviet society, the more laws you have, actually the less rule of law you have, because it's just a labyrinth for people to do whatever they want. The concept of rule of law is to provide everybody equality of justice, right? And so if it's the end state that matters, not the number of laws that matters. So the problem with Tunisian society is not that they don't have laws, it's just that they don't have a system that provides equality of justice. So I think that gets to Anthony's point is we're not actually promoting elections. What we're promoting is the notion that people have sovereignty over their own society. We're not really promoting laws. We're promoting people that have equality of justice. Just like we're promoting religious freedom, we're not promoting, in a sense, one religion is favored or protected, has some kind of protected status over another. I think those are really important distinctions. But again, I think what's really important is, in this administration's going after this issue of the global Islamist insurgency, in a sense, it's kind of dumbed the argument down to kind of bumper stickers, which create this very low bar that they can accomplish. So in a sense, what the president's done is gone down to empathy. Well, we care about the people in that region. Okay, but they're not actually doing the hard work, which actually will have transform people and empower them. So this is, okay, I will give you the last question, but so we'll ask our question, okay, and then your question, and then we'll be done.
Okay, I will be briefly. My name is Di Dongsheng, and I'm from Beijing, and a visiting scholar in Georgetown University. The reason I'm not an expert on Islamic world, but the reason I come to this and stayed from early morning here, that so far is that now China is going to actually be invited. I personally received some friends from NATO delegations to Beijing to lobby Beijing to invest more money and even militarily in Afghanistan, to help mitigate the shock that brought about by the potential drain of the people. I appreciate a lot for all the panelists, your speaker, your interesting views, and especially this panel, because I'm more economist. And the question is, we talked a lot about democratization, rule of law, economic freedom, and the most important point that I would like to express my agreement is about the economic freedom. China, if we look back on China's experience and the lessons, is that we for a century fight for political change, then went to nowhere, especially before 1949. Then Mao Zedong came into power and said, okay, it's not only because of politics, it's also because of culture. So he launched a cultural revolution to try to change the gene of the civilization of China. And then it also ended in turmoil and a disaster. And finally, now China is relatively the better direction of modernization. Yeah? China is more like Westerners rather than looks like similar to Asian Chinese, because finally we embraced global capitalist. We embraced export-oriented economy, open economy, economic freedom. So my argument is that there may be a proper logic embedded here. So there should be a priority. You cannot say, okay, over one night we change everything, the culture, the civilization, the politics, the economics, at the same day. It's impossible. We should have sort of priority. So my question to you guys is, what do you think about the priority? Thank you.
So we'll go to our last question, but let me ask you, where do you see, because I think one way to kind of interpret that is, what do you think the best candidates are, or the most important targets in the greater Middle East of countries where either economic freedom will blossom or needs to blossom?
I mean, if I may, that's why I emphasize we cannot let Tunisia fail, because if we let the country fail, then we are losing this battle. I mean, China, you compare China with what's happening in the region, but in this specific region we are talking about today, there's a toxic marriage between extreme case of religious repression plus extreme case of chronic capitalism. I mean, these two are combined, and these two are really shackling all the system of the countries in the region. China, luckily, you didn't have that. So you could have economic freedom, and then you can move on to something else. But in this part of the world, these two are very complicated sort of marriage together. So I think we really need to make Tunisia successful, because Tunisia is different from these conditions.
I think that one important difference also is that in China China evolved into the country where there was proper education, and China evolved into the country where there was critical thinking that actually led towards the reform that made economic sense. The problem in the Middle East is that, again, for decades you had an education that was, in Tunisia, when you speak to people, the worst thing you can mention to them is liberal capitalism. They're terrified of the liberal capitalism because they think that this is some greedy American idea, and some greedy Americans are going to come and steal away. I don't even know what they're going to steal away from them, but they're going to come and steal their properties from them.
We're going to come and build Star Wars 12.
Exactly. That's a big problem, because there's no, with an average Tunisian citizen, a voter who votes in the elections, who should own the change and the equal position in his society, that person doesn't understand the liberal economic change, the liberal open market. And this is something important. This is the first important step where people just need to be explained. What is it? How does it work? How does it going to make my life different, and why is it better or not than other comparative systems? That's one thing. Just to answer your question, in the region, the countries I think still have a chance. Tunisia by far, but definitely Morocco. I think that Morocco is kind of halfway between Tunisia and Turkey in many ways. It's been opening economically, still not perfect, but a lot of opportunities. I think Jordan still has a chance, and I think things are happening there. These are the countries that have been stable. Gulf countries, it depends a lot on the ruling families and what they decide. I think that some of them may be smart enough to actually go through this evolution. And finally, not necessarily in the region, but on the borders of it, and with a big influence, Turkey.
Any hope for Egypt?
I think it would be great if the change happened there, but I don't know how it's going to happen and what are the steps.
That's not comforting. So I will give you the last question.
Elise Hampton, Institute of World Politics. I've listened to everything that you've said today, and I like it. You have a multifaceted approach. One of the things that I wanted to comment on is, theoretically speaking, and I've read quite a bit about this, is that the single most important determiner in a sufficient democratic rule of law, and what we've seen not only in this nation, what we've seen in Europe, what we've seen in Korea, what we've seen in Japan, what we've seen globally, what we hope to see in China, is a strong, sustainable middle class. Is this still true? And could this be one of the key components in which we're not directly addressing? Because countries like China can be making lots of money, but if it's not equally distributed among their people, then you do not have a middle class. We see in the Middle East where there are some portions of the middle class, so there are outliners to this theory. But in general, having the entrepreneurial tentacles and people, as you have said, having sovereignty over their own life, and people, as you both have mentioned, kind of circumventing the elitism and the crony capitalism, which is something different. Could this be helpful if we approach it from this aspect?
Absolutely, I'd say so. But in order to get there, once again, I think we have to go through those things we talked about here, rule of law and functioning economic system. Here at the Heritage Foundation, we talk about opportunity for all and favoritism to none. That concept should be applied to these countries. Unless we are able to do so, we cannot really cultivate the functioning middle class.
Right, so it's not about just getting the job.
Right.
Soviets
Right.
gave people jobs.
Right.
Nazi Germany gave people jobs. It's about human capital and human beings reaching.
Right. I wish we had that on the microphone.
Yeah.
George.
Well,
yeah.
again, yes, I agree with you. And again, the countries that I mentioned as the countries with potential are the ones with some kind of a seed for the middle class. It also comes with education. It also comes with other elements of the society. But I think that the regimes that existed and some regimes that still exist in this region do not have an interest in having a strong middle class. Because if you have a strong middle class, you have a strong citizen. A strong citizen is gonna come and say, hey, where's my money? And if I'm paying tax, what am I paying tax for? That is the question that is essential, and that is something that is still to be heard from the region of the Middle East. Not
So I guess like double secret probation, we have double last question.
Warren Coates. I'm retired from the International Monetary Fund and have spent a lot of recent years working in Afghanistan and Iraq. I want to just endorse Mr. Kim's emphasis on the rule of law and suggest that modern telecommunications, the internet, and so on should provide us with a lot of hope of the ability of the people we're talking about to get good information. And if our foreign policy emphasized more the importance of the rule of law rather than democracy, which is an element, but if that were the emphasis, it's the rule of law that empowers individuals. And in my work in Afghanistan, I just want to give a little short story where I'm very impressed with how quickly young people grab on to this kind of idea and fight to preserve it. What I worry about is how long will they continue to fight against headwinds, et cetera. But the little story, I worked with the central bank in Afghanistan. They adopted, with a lot of Western technical assistance and so on, normal merit-based personnel policies. Well, this is very contrary to Afghan culture, which is who you know and family and political patronage and so on. But this was very quickly, surprisingly quickly embraced by the young. The staff is probably on average 25 years old, you know, I mean, and they saw that as empowering, as right, and as something that they, you know, wanted to see their administration adhere to. The governor, of course, depending on which governor, one was more inclined to embrace these rules and embed them. The next one was a little weaker and took more pressure from the parliament to hire family friends and this and that. Well, the young people in the central bank resented that. You know, they saw that as sliding back and disempowering them and, you know, going back to the old way. Well, you know, I think we need to build on that, as you said, and that's really a good part of the hope of the future, I think.
So in summary, let me just, if I may, kind of tie those last two thoughts together, because I think they apply not just to the economic freedom agenda, but to also some of the other issues that we've talked about, which is when you begin to operationalize this in the greater Middle East and South Asia, the paths are going to be different, right? You have different great power influences. The Sunni-Shia divide breaks down differently in different places. The ideological struggle has a different character in different states. The states have different challenges and geography and ethnic groups all their own, and the tribal influences manifest themselves differently in different places. So the path is going to be unique. That what goes on in Tunisia is not going to look identical to what goes on in Morocco or Egypt or other countries. And that requires a level of sophistication and a level of commitment on the part of the United States if it truly wants to be a constructive force, not just to have an initiative, but to have a constructive outcome than I think we're doing now, which has been reduced, I think, to some very simplistic bumper stickers, which are more about setting low bars, which are remarkably achievable, rather than actually being transformative. And of course, being very selfish from our perspective, you know, why do we care? Well, we care because we're a global power with global interest, and it's called the Middle East for a reason, because it's in the middle of everything, and it matters to the success and the prosperity of the planet. And walking away from the Middle East doesn't mean we walk away from those troubles. As long as we're a global power, those will be intimately part of our troubles. The challenge for the United States is not correctly put by the president. Our options aren't between invading every country and doing nothing. Obviously, everybody agrees the answer has to be somewhere in the middle. But the question is what is feasible, suitable, and acceptable? What is constructive and positive? I think my takeaway from today is that what the administration has laid out is not that path, that path is something different. That path has to much more conform to the kinds of things that our analysts and commentators have talked about today. And I hope that for folks is the takeaway of the challenge that I think our administration really has going forward in having a substantive policy that not just doesn't confront global Islam and the challenges of the greater Middle East and South Asia, but really America's role of leadership in the world. So thank you all for finishing up with us. Thank you to our panelists, and let's applaud for them. And see you all next time. Thank you so much.